Joining us this evening, this is a call to order of the Aspen City Council special meeting for August 29th, 2022. Could we have a roll call for attendance today?
Here.
Councilor Mesereau. Councilor Richards.
Here.
Mayor Tory.
Here. This evening, we have one item on our agenda. This is an action item, resolution number 106, a resolution of City Council of City of Aspen for submitting to the electorate on November 8th, a question for short-term rental taxes for the purposes described in the ballot question. I think we have a...
Yes, but I believe the resolution needs introduced when it's an action item. I can't remember now.
Do we have to have a first reading?
It's not
No,
necessary.
because it's a resolution. I just still get confused that we're doing this by
It's
resolution.
just a resolution. It
Okay.
doesn't need a first reading or second reading. It can be passed tonight. So it's ready
Okay.
for you to proceed.
Thank you for clarifying for me, Jim. Members of council, thank you. This evening is the work product of your conversation about 2 weeks ago regarding short-term rentals and whether to forward a question to the voters related to it. And really tonight, again, it's about facilitating that voter question as we move on for them the voters to decide if this is an appropriate activity for the community. If you recall, your short-term rental fee covers the program administration for compliance and issuing permits, et cetera, for the program. In your conversations, you have elected to not include any affordable housing mitigation in the determination of that fee, and that has been a driver for you in this discussion, along with recognizing community impacts that we've provided you quite a bit of analysis on. So we'll go over the additional information that you sought for tonight, as well as providing for you the draft resolution. Our intentions are that we will provide a quick staff report, answer any clarifying questions, and then staff's going to step back so that the conversation is here at the council table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, okay to share my screen?
Please do.
Here we are. So, as Sarah mentioned, we are just going to run through a number of slides briefly, and then we will turn it back over to the council for your discussion. Based on our meeting on August 16th, we got some feedback from the council that basically provided us a few of the parameters on how to proceed forward. Those included things like we are targeting the 2022 November ballot, the fact that the effective date of a new tax, if it were to be put forth to the voters, would begin May 1st. That we still had maybe an interest in tiering some of the tax rates for the different types of permits, and that we're going to really target affordable housing as the priority for the revenue stream of the funds would be going for infrastructure and environmental initiatives. So during that August 16th meeting, we did take away at least a baseline number to start off with. That included the lodge exempt properties at a 5.4% tax rate. The owner-occupied permits would have somewhere of a range, maybe between 5.4 up to 10, and the classic would be 10%, maybe higher. So we really stuck with right now the 5.4% for the first two and 10% for the third category at this time. We need to get clarity on that through tonight's process if this were to proceed forward. We also needed to know, I guess, how to structure the ballot language so that we address the council's preferences in terms of affordable housing. Should it be an absolute percentage or should it be a minimum threshold? And then do we need to further prescribe the remainder amounts, or should that just be kind of lumped in as the remainder can go for X and Y kind of collectively? Through the past number of months, maybe year plus, we've been working obviously with the stakeholder group and checking in with the council periodically, and we have been doing analysis through that entire time and working through the fee question versus the tax question. As Sarah mentioned, we did pass the fee ordinance at this point, and that was to cover kind of the impacts of the program itself in terms of the operational costs, and the tax tonight would be considering for all the impacts related to tourism itself. So trying to estimate what the tax would bring in under these percentages, we have to make a ton of assumptions. I am not going to read through them all, but I did want to basically just list out a number of those here just so you get a sense of the aspect of there's a lot of unknowns until we really have all the permits come in the door and we are able to assess each property and what it would actually qualify for. The numbers on the right-hand side of the screen really reflect basically taking a snapshot of the data, making our best guess as to where each property would kind of fall into place. This was a 12-month period and trying to exclude kind of the January through March or April timeframe at the beginning of 21 where we had kind of some soft numbers yet. So all that to say, looking at each of those categories and making those assumptions, we basically have an analysis of what a 1% tax would be in each one of those groupings. It comes out to about $1.2 million. These numbers are very conservative, I will say, because we're proposing a ballot question to the voters potentially. I'm trying to be on the high side just so we don't have any issues and undersell what the tax would be and therefore have Tabor issues and things of that nature. And then with that, you know, there were different percentages of how to align what the uses would which uses would benefit from how much. And basically it's about a $60,000 swing for every 5% that moves up or down. So this is basically a table to show you just a few different scenarios, but the ones that are kind of listed in green are what we used for the baseline assumption and what's in the draft resolution at this point. So under the draft resolution, it'd be about $9.1 million in 2024. This is what this is estimating because that's what the Tabor question would have to be for our first full year of implementation. And then at the 65-35 split, it's about $6 million to affordable housing and about a little bit more than $3 million for environmental and infrastructure related items. So really back to the council, the questions are what would the rates need to be for the different permit types? And then, you know, is there different language than what's in the draft ordinance currently, which basically is right now set up to say at least 65% goes towards affordable housing, with the remainder going towards environmental initiatives and infrastructure maintenance and repair. And those are kind of collectively noted in the other remainder amount. So is that the preferred language or not? And then also the percentages themselves. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you, and I can put up any of these slides if you wanted different ones up there on the screen.
Just for clarity, so the resolution is written with 65% in the language, 5.4%, and 10% for the different categories, different tiers?
Correct. At least 65% on the affordable housing, so it could be higher if the council directed us to through the budgeting process, but it could not fall below that amount. And yes, 5.4 for the first two permit types and 10% for the classic.
Okay, so the at least is in there as well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments at this time? Council members?
Well, I think the easy part is the second question. I would like to see 70% minimum with the 30% have some flexibility as to how it is administered annually, but to lock in a minimum of 70% for workforce housing, or lock it in at 70%.
Yeah, I agree with that, Ward. I think we've heard from Skippy that he believes the question should be for higher numbers than we're considering at this time. And so going from a 65 to 75 is a minor push towards more housing. And I think that is what polled the highest for community need, but I also know what our infrastructure needs are as well. So I would go with a 70-30 on that.
I'd support 70-30 as well.
All right. All right, the easy stuff's done, Ward.
Well, you want me to lead off here?
If you like, no need, you know.
Well, I'd like to have this be a robust conversation. It's an issue that we've been looking at in the city, at city council, for several years. It's not a new thing. I know that a couple of years ago, we had initiated licensing so we could start to get some baseline figures of how much STRs are contributing to our bed base. And so this is, in the whole moratorium was addressing what is real or perceived, that short-term rentals in the residential districts have contributed greatly to the impacts that I think are listed in the memo and were listed in the emergency ordinance. Increase in demand on services, increase on the number of workers to deliver those services, competition with workers between SDRs and businesses and the public sector, increased traffic and congestion in residential neighborhoods, noise and quality of life in residential neighborhoods, construction and STR-centric residential LLC-owned, basically commercial operations in residential neighborhoods, increased parking demand in residential neighborhoods, loss of sense of community in neighborhoods, to mention just a few. So for me, the way I viewed this is that this STR that we're really, it's a question, what our goals are. We trying to add a 65% mitigation across the board to all existing lodges, or are we trying to really focus on what I think are the impact generating STRs? And for me, I think the impact generating are the new STRs in residential neighborhoods. To get to kind of jump to perhaps an area of conflict or disagreement, is I think this never started off as being a means to address a disparity in commercial and residential property taxes. I certainly understand the differences, the rate differences, but I think that there are some contributing factors that makes it not very clear, or it's not a black and white, it's not a straightforward way, because it's been brought to our attention that there's differences in the way that the actual residential and commercial properties are valued. And an increased rate on a smaller amount or a decreased rate on a larger amount, that it's along the lines of their lies, damn lies, and statistics, and it's a bit confusing. But I'll mention that it's an area that is of concern to me, but I acknowledge that it exists. What the goals are, and I've felt that the goals should be to mitigate the areas of short-term rentals that have not been mitigated previously, that are a cause of the impacts I mentioned, and that are also mentioned in our memo and have been mentioned in the whereas clauses, 7 pages of whereas clauses for the emergency ordinance. I feel that the Aspen Area Community Plan is still our guiding document, and I think that the proliferation of commercial rentals in residential neighborhoods is in violation of a number of the principles that are mentioned in the Aspen Area Community Plan. I think it takes away from a diverse bed base. I think it has a negative effect on workforce housing. I think it is driving commercial or residential construction. That's one of the things that we were trying to focus on, that there was so much residential construction that we needed to do something. I will acknowledge, and I think every community across the country and everywhere I go, I pick up local newspapers, and this is an issue that's not just Aspen, it's not just the Mountain West, it's the whole country. And it's the shortage of workforce housing and the impacts of short-term rentals. It's possible that we saw a trend, we saw it peak, and now it's going to taper. It's also possible that the trend we've seen will continue. So we're set with the challenge of, do we react to what the impacts are now, with the risk that couple of years from now, people are going to say, well, that's never been an issue, why did they do that? Or do we act now? If we don't act now, the public, and the trend continues, the public can go, why didn't City Council do something? Why didn't government do something about this? Because it was a known issue. So we have to, at this table, decide if we are going to act on it now, or if we're going to let it slide and see what happens. And I'm of the position that it's time to act on it. I think that we need to be more proactive than reactive years from now, that we have had for many months active conversations, engagement from stakeholders from within our community. I don't think we're ever going to be more clear on what the impacts are, or what we have perceived as the impacts, than we are right now. So I think now's the time to act. For me, it's a question of, how do we do this equitably without punishing some sectors? And I think the more surgical we get to try to be fair to all sectors, the more untenable it's going to be, and the more difficult it's going to be to administer, and the more difficult it is going to be for the taxpayers to grasp. And ultimately, what I think our goal is to generate funds to mitigate the impacts. So if I were to sit down and craft an ordinance or a ballot question, ideally what I would do is acknowledge the condo hotels, the benefit that they've provided to our community of 50, 60 years, that there's a fly in the ointment there, and that there are STRCs in those zone districts that have been traditionally our bed base, that we're targeting as not wanting to negatively affect. So to craft what would be the most surgical, I would do a zoning overlay on the different permits. So, for example, in the lodge districts, in the core area where our traditional bed base has been, to have, say, an STR LEC, lodge exempt commercial, or classic rather. These are ideas that I'm throwing out. I think that if I knew for certain that the only impacts were caused by new rentals in residential neighborhoods, I'd say don't tax the OOs, don't tax the LEs, and let's put a 20% tax on the classics that are in residential neighborhoods. I think that is applying a mitigation factor to where I perceive the major impacts are caused by. But with the realization that we have to make it the KISS, we have to try to get something that's simple enough, yet is equitable. And so I'm throwing it out for discussion, opening all these topics for discussion, because I think what I would like to do before we leave here at 4:30 to, what are you laughing at, John? that we put this to bed this evening in something that is equitable, and that ultimately the taxpayers can get behind, and that we can pass, so we can mitigate the impacts that we have identified.
Yeah. Ward, I respect how you're looking at this and the thought you've put into it. I do take a different approach. Let's see where to start. I think it's important to kind of note that I believe property tax is an element of how we are trying to equalize and make fair the STR tax. I cannot see exempting the lodge exempt hotels from this. I would consider lowering the rate that we've asked for in this from 5.4 to 5% to be just a easier and a little bit more of a reduction. I would say that 5% is significantly lower than the 13.4% that the public was polled on and felt would probably be appropriate. For me, and this was in responding to a comment I'd gotten from someone else today, I'll just read this, but I believe we are at a point at which we have so many commercial lodging properties, even if they are or were traditional lodging accommodations, that pay residential property tax rates while expecting community services to serve and satisfy their commercial revenue generation and their guests' expectations, that the resort support infrastructure we have is at a breaking point, and that's not just talking about housing. At the end of the day, if it's a lodging accommodation in a property that is not paying residential property tax, and we've had some wonderful wonderful examples of how much each of these units that can rent for 40 weeks out of the year and pay a residential property tax, how much more they're worth than the Limelight Hotel. But if those same residential values were paying the commercial property tax rate, they'd be paying 3 times more than they are now, 3 times. And, you know, I don't know if people realize that the city pays dedicates a 0.3 cent sales tax to the school district. So we actually can have school services because the property taxes don't cover what the school needs to operate in a resort community like this. We have streets that are starting to fail. We have sewer systems that are failing. We're all facing climate change and the need to both mitigate and prepare for that. The housing is severe and getting worse. You know, as you pointed out, Tori, not long ago, a lot of people's one-year leases are coming up now, and they're not getting renewed. And the STR demand for housing, it goes all the way through Glenwood Springs and beyond. And I simply say it'd be easier for us to not upset anybody. The ski company, the ACRA, the residential property owners, the condo hotels, and we'll all just see if it works out well in another 5 years, or another 2 years, or another 3 years, when the El Jebel new tree farm development comes on, and all their homes that are affordable are going in the RO price range for our missing middle, as they call it, but certainly not for service workers, certainly not for hotel workers. And their new commercial development is going to require vastly more employees than they're going to house. Another reason to just get off the bus before coming up to the Aspen traffic jam. And the wages are pretty darn good Mid-Valley, you know. You could just talk to anyone about that. So I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I find it interesting where the comment how long these elements, condo hotels, have benefited the community. I think it's worth looking at the other side of that to say how long has the community benefited the condo hotels? How many great events have we staged and volunteers have we put together that made coming to Food and Wine Weekend worth an extra 30% premium? How much has the community given to be able to create the value in all those residential units? It's a lot. We've sacrificed a lot, and what we've really sacrificed is our people, is our community, is our housing. You know, that's what we're deficit on in a huge way. So I think we can turn that question around and ask. I think what we've looked at in multiple work sessions is the demand for employees that's created outside of making the bed and doing the laundry. Is there a rafting guide for somebody? Is there a chef? Is there a third waitress now that the line is out the door and we don't have any waitresses? It's the demand for people to serve to actually create the value that people are paying. We're sitting here talking about a 5% that would go on this, potentially for the owner-occupieds and the lodge-exempt, we could hold off another year or two and see if those rates don't rise 5% on their own every year, you know, and the community gets nothing. And the community will continue to suffer. This is what we're losing. I mean, we have a lot of people who are part of this community, who contribute and who work, whether it's in the short-term rental or the architectural community, who've all benefited from affordable housing. And yet now we are in such a deficit because we have dependent on the free market to provide our workforce. 65% of it, who is just not that interested in coming up here anymore for a lot of reasons. One is how the guests treat them. The other is that the wages are just as good and eligible, you know, and that we have this imbalance, and if we do not put something forward to the voters to consider, to decide, the voters will decide if this is fair and if this is what they need to do for the community, or we walk away from it. So I look at this seeing that you wanted something lower or exemptions for some people, and Skippy wanted something a lot higher than what we're proposing here today. I think this lands fairly correctly in the middle, and it's taxing what are tourist accommodations. They are tourist accommodations that are paying a residential property tax rate, and that's a difference. And I want to be very, very clear on something as well. If we go with this lower rate that's being proposed here, it doesn't come close to equalizing property tax rates. So it's not as if that's gonna, you know, is the magic touch. You know, that this is just one element of it. It's one component of looking at the whole problem. So I think we should go forward with this now. We heard very clearly, do not tax the permit fees. Leave the permit fees alone. We'll add it to our cost of doing business. You know, I'm not up here at the table able to say that this platform or that platform shouldn't charge a 20% commission. You know, maybe they should only charge 15. But that's their cost of doing business. That's what they need for the service. Well, our community needs police officers. Our community needs people to be able to repair the streets and fix the electric lines and run the water systems. And folks, they're not buying $13 million homes, and they're not buying homes and rifle anymore when prices go up 40% in 1 year. And that's what we are facing as a resort and as a community. And maybe it's time that we stop pretending we're a community and we're just a resort, and we can become like a Vail. But this is part of the cost of doing business here. It's part of maintaining the benefits and the attraction and the things that generate the high demand from our guests and from guests across the world to come here. I think we have an obligation to try to keep both our community and those amenities. And that's why I will support this with a few changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. A lot of really well-said things in there. I appreciate that. A lot of things that I was going to bring up, but I appreciate you shining a light on them right away. John, do you have any comments or questions at this time?
Yeah, just some quick comments. First of all, bravo, Rachel. I think you stated the position very well, and that means I don't have to talk very much. I do agree that our condo hotels have been in operation for years and have provided a necessary bed base for tourists that come here to enjoy what we have to offer. A lived-in community, a place that has excellent infrastructure that they've come to expect at other high-end resorts. And some of these hotels do house a portion of their workers. But currently, they're not contributing as much to the current shortfall in housing, the current shortfall in infrastructure that's necessary, and the environmental issues that this tax is trying to address. And that's the goal of what this tax is about. As far as the argument that if we raise taxes too much, people will stop coming here, I haven't seen it. So I support this going forward with possibly a few minor tweaks as well.
Thanks, John. I guess a majority of my comments are going to be for council members. But of course, some of the members of the audience want to hear some of our reasonings as well. So first thing I'll say is, none of us enjoy strains on our community and our infrastructure. None of us enjoy asking for tax approval from our voters. We'd rather we didn't. As Rachel said, if we were just in that track of being a resort community, we wouldn't be doing that, but we're not. We're taking care of our community. From the survey that we had, a majority, 2/3 of our polled electorate supports a new STR tax. And I'm reading from the findings, if the focus of the STR tax becomes more about equity of private property being used for commercial purposes, then that support is even larger, pushing opposition to its minimum. Short-term rentals and affordable housing are clearly linked in the minds of tax supporters. And then when we start talking about what the tax looks like, there was a question asked about the tiering, a tiered approach to these taxes. And truly one that had voter or poll electorate support here was actually for 6% tax on fully managed condominiums, 13% on non-resident owned STRs, 8% for owner occupied. That got approval ratings in the survey as well. So again, as we've landed on, let's call it 5% for 2 classes of permits, 10% for the classic, this is as close to mirroring what our polls have returned to us, but actually with a little bit of softening. And I bring this up because I don't sit here in this seat determining what I want for the businesses or owners of properties, because I'd probably want no taxes if it came down to that. But I sit in this seat and I try to work on solutions for our community. This is a ballot question, so it will be up to the voters to determine their support for this. I think that where we've gotten with this is, again, as a council, we have council members on the low end, council members on the high end. We are looking at a community that is somewhere in the middle, and I think that that's what representation up here is all about. So for me, I can support what we're initiating for our community to be voting on. And again, this is for our community to vote on. And it is returning to them what we have heard from some of the answers that we got in our polling. I could give you my separate personal account of this and why I think that half of the taxation that we are asking the voters to approve for the classics, half of that for owner-occupied. Owner-occupied, I believe that with an owner resident, you are looking at a property that is cared for, looked after, and maintained by a resident, thereby needing less service in many cases. I think there was a study shared recently from another community that says that in their community, they see short-term rentals as actually being three times usage of certain resources. So for owner-occupied, I acknowledge that perhaps that affordable housing mitigation can be lessened because of their impacts. For the condominiums, managed lodge properties that are condominiums, that are individually owned, that pay residential taxation on their property taxes, I also support them being at a lower rate because I feel like some of the services and the management of those properties also minimizes some of the impacts, but there are not none. And so I do support, and Rachel, your suggestion I think is great. From 5.4, make it a clean 5%. I think that makes it easily understandable just by getting rid of a decimal point. So I think that there's a lot of reasons that this is justified, but the biggest one for me is that this is what I've heard from my community. We've done a lot of outreach on this, and these are the answers that we've gotten back. So I want to return to my community a question that's on their ballot that reflects what they've communicated to me, and this is it. Ward?
Yeah, I can support a tiered structure. I'm going to offer a little bit different percentage, but the question to me is there support on this council for the classics in the core area that have been traditional bed base for decades? That kind of requires a zoning overlay on top, and I know it makes it more difficult. I want to bring it up because I think that there's equity in that. Is there any support for putting those LTE or those classics in the zone where most of the LTEs are at a rate that's commensurate with the LTE rate?
Board, to really sort through that sort of potential zoning change and the pluses and minuses, I think we would be talking about a March at the beginning minimum, and maybe not until a question of the next regularly scheduled, which would be November 24. But I don't know how we could invent that on the fly in any sort of timely fashion for this. So I can't go there. Maybe future work with a future council can look at ways of modifying or coming along with that, but I just can't see delaying this now to try to accomplish that.
Yeah, I don't want to delay it, and I think if we modify it in the future, it'll have to go to a vote.
Perhaps.
So I want to bring this up because I feel it is an equity issue. I'm not going to fall on my sword over it, but I think that it deserves serious consideration. And I said I might tweak it a bit. I would lower the rate on the lodge exempt to 4% and increase on the Cs to 12%. I think the community support was for a tax on it where the impacts are, and I think that they're more on the Cs than there are on the lodge exempt. So I think that we might wind up with about the same amount of money by dropping 1% on the lodge exempt and increasing a couple of percent on the classics. What are the thoughts on that?
I think this is a pretty solid proposal now, Ward.
5 and 10?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, you'd think, no. I was going to say, even the 10 sounds high to me, and you're saying take it that maybe to 12. I have a hard time with that.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, when we were talking before, at our first meeting, I had mentioned maybe lowering that now to 9, and so to support a 10 is a give for me.
John, any thoughts?
I'm pretty pleased with staff's recommendation. I will be willing to talk about lowering the LE tax a small amount, but raising the classic, I'm going to stick with staff's recommendation.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in the same ballpark at 5 and 10. I think that's a clean delineation for our community. And again, from looking at polling responses, I think that we've taken the softest approach here from what we were returned for information as well. So I'm going to be hopeful for a motion that is reflective of the two items that we've spoken to today. Is 70% allocated towards the affordable housing, 30% of tax revenues to go to other uses.
The infrastructure and environmental
Yeah, I think it'll
initiatives.
stay with that wording. And then 5% with owner-occupied, lodge exempt, and 10% as the rate for your classic short-term.
Mayor, do you support that there should be some flexibility on how that 30% is allocated?
I am looking at Jim because I'm,
So there's previous tax, well, he's getting ready. There's previous tax questions that allowed discretion at the council table to determine that through the annual budgeting process. The perfect example is the affordable housing and childcare sales tax. So the way the ballot language is constructed provides that authority based upon the community needs in that budget year for the council to be able to fluctuate whether more than 70% should go into the affordable housing bucket. You could say some years it needs to be 100%. And not to the other two priorities. But you have the ability, as long as that first, what I'm hearing is 70% goes in, every dollar after that first 70% would be a review of the work program in those areas to determine which ones you think are appropriate to fund and allow the flexibility between them. Putting specific percentages on them are certainly something you could do to support voters and clarity. I would say, though, that we don't necessarily budget that way.
I want to make sure I understand
The question.
question, though, is that the way, Philip has put up on the board the changes that have been proposed here tonight. The way this is written is that at least 70% goes to affordable housing. More can clearly go to affordable housing. If 70% is dedicated to affordable housing, then the balance of the 30% can be utilized for the other two proposals. I think Sarah explained it right.
Yeah.
That after the 70%, there's flexibility for all of it to go to affordable housing. There's flexibility for the rest to be divided between the other two, the maintenance of infrastructure and environmental initiatives.
Yeah.
So the flexibility and the decision-making is council's.
I think the key element is the minimum that goes towards affordable housing for people to see that the vast majority of these revenues will be dedicated towards that purpose. And the others will give us some flexibility to address current infrastructure needs and future councils to address future infrastructure needs and taking care of climate mitigation. So, very good. Let me just ask, I saw that Philip had changed this, but the 5.4 is still up there. It's not saying the .0.
There's actually a line between.
I see it
the 4.
underneath there.
You
Oh,
just can't see it.
oh, I see. He didn't
But
erase the 4.
This is a track change.
Oh, okay.
And this reflects that the 4 is deleted and replaced with a 0.
Okay, thank you.
Just, you can see it better when it's the 70-65.
Yeah, I can see
I would
it down
also
there.
note that I have a grammatical question for any people that are experts in this and whether that comma should be before the at 5.0%, at 5.0%, at 10%.
So you don't need the commas, is what you're saying? No commas. Take the commas out.
Okay. It was there.
Conan,
first-
the grammarian.
Yeah.
That's not in Robert's rules.
No, I do not claim to be I used to ask Catherine, we can ask Nicole, she can play that role. But yeah, if you want to take those commas out, then that would be appropriate.
Okay.
But otherwise, this is what the discussion of council has been for tonight. This is what at least 3 of you have.
Well, for discussion's sake, I'll make a motion. I would approve resolution number 106, series of 2022, with the modification of the removal of excess commas, with the tax rate for LE and OO permits to be reduced to 5%, and the split between affordable housing and other infrastructure needs and environmental initiative would be 70-30.
Well, it's written as at least 70%.
At least 70-30, yeah, I know, I'm just changing the
Yeah.
65-35.
But the proposal that you just moved is reflected on the screen here,
Okay.
just for the record.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
Yeah, I have some comments. I think that throughout the country, there's been no perfect STR regulation. I feel that this is not a perfect answer to the questions. I think it could be more surgical, but I think it's a really good step in the right direction. Don't let, how's it saying?
Perfect.
Perfect stand in the way of the good, or,
Yeah, something happened to our,
yeah,
to
so
our,
we're connecting.
We're disconnected.
So I will support this, but I do think that it's not perfect, and I would have liked to seen a lower tax for some of those Cs that are in the lodge districts, but I see no support here. So I will be supporting it.
Thank you for that, Ward.
Thanks, Ward.
want to make sure we're,
Broadcasting.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
we get back on Zoom.
Any additional comments? Okay. Yeah, I've said everything that I really wanted to say about this. I think that this is a proposal that our community was asking to see. They want an opportunity to vote on this. I think we're doing our job by returning this to our community. Last week, I was at a Colorado Association of Ski Towns meeting for 2 days, and STRs and the taxation was the hot topic. There are 4 other communities that are planning on asking a taxation question on their November ballot. I think 3 out of the 4 were higher than these rates.
That's what I recall.
Along with that, the support from other communities, those that have enacted taxes already in their communities, was unending. And they really were, really sharing the positive aspects of what they got done. They said that their community was very accepting of it in the long run, and that truly, since those taxes have been enacted, that they have not had really necessarily any opposition, questioning, and they definitely said that it did not impact what they saw as their visitorship. We're still
You know,
not
I
in.
think it's our whole
It is our-
computer system that's down, because I can't get back into my Dropbox now. It's not just the, not that I need my
Could you get those tin cans
Dropbox.
out, Joseph? Sir? Could you get the tin cans out in the string?
Yeah.
Can we go on?
So close.
And where were the live reporters who could have covered this for us, you know, without the Facebook Live?
So,
Enjoying life
as of
somewhere.
right now, Amy believes she has not lost her internet connection,
Okay.
unlike the rest of us. I actually still have mine too,
I
so
do too.
there's something about which network you're on probably associated with this. So, Mr. Mayor, if you want to go ahead and vote without Zoom, Amy will have it, and it will be available for her broadcasts from GrassRoots.
I want to make sure we also have this in Granicus.
We won't be able to get Granicus back. We'll be sitting here a long time.
She can give me the rest of the video and I can upload it.
Yeah.
If you guys are comfortable, technologically,
Jim, we've spliced this before when it's happened.
Numbers.
Make sure it's a complete
Right.
record.
Connect.
We've come a long way.
We make it clear that they're two separate files.
First time I saw
And what the source was.
56K connection.
Right.
Pardon me, Amy, we
Yeah,
can't hear you.
We're still on. We're still on.
Channel 11 is fine, and YouTube is still streaming.
Okay.
Great. Okay. We had a motion and a second, and last discussion. I want to thank all you guys that are in the room, and thank you all for the emails and the letters that we've received from your client base as well. But thank you all for your immediate participation. With that, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes,
Mayor Tory.
Yes.
thank you. Would you take a motion to adjourn the meeting, sir?
Yes.
I would
Second.
move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote for adjournment?
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Just as a heads up, we will still keep a special meeting on September 6th based upon what would have been a work session. There's items for executive session that evening.
Okay, so that makes sense.
That's the day after the Labor Day, yep. Okay.